Greetings, ladies and gentlemen. Travis Lishak here, EP Nexus. Here's my second conversation with Ilya Umanskiy of Integrated Systems and Services and also Sphere State, which is his latest project in mentoring aspiring security professionals. In this conversation, we discuss a range of topics concerning aspiring professionals in the security industry. To give you a taste, we touch on certification. I get Ilya's take on personal branding for security professionals, considerations relating to undergraduate and graduate studies, and much more. In the original post on EP Nexus, you will find a full transcript with links to everything we talk about. I got some great insight out of this conversation, and I think you will too, whether you're an aspiring professional yourself or whether you're mentoring aspiring security professionals. For Ilya's full bio, please reference the text of our interview. It should suffice for now to say that Ilya is an experienced asset protection professional and security consultant. Enjoy.
Again, thank you for giving me this opportunity. It's always a pleasure to speak with you, and I value kind of your insights into our profession, and it's great that we have this exchange, and hopefully it will be useful as we always aspire for the rest of our community. First question you posed to me is what should aspiring professionals consider during undergrad and grad? And I had to pause for a little bit just to kind of get my grips with the right answer, because I think that there's something about what I call the bias of focused curiosity that prevents a lot of young and aspiring professionals from really flourishing in our profession and also getting engaged at the right level and building the right skill set. And it seems that there is something to be said about the quality of their studies. They dive in, they look at very specific subject matters that are guided by their professors or their instructors. They may concentrate on a few topics that are kind of relevant to the core subject matter that they're studying. But what happens with that is that they become so focused that they lose the bandwidth of visibility of other very interesting and very important areas that build their skill set. So as an example, I always say, I just gave a talk at John Jay College, and a lot of people are, for example, in fraud investigations and forensic accounting disciplines. So guess what they talk about? They talk about forensic accounting and fraud investigations. That's kind of their discussions, and it occupies 80 to 90% of their time, both in college and outside. And so, yes, of course, they have hobbies and things, so that are personal to them. But then, to build their skill set, they really are not looking at related disciplines, for example, such as design. There's a lot to be said about ethical behavior in design, and it's becoming a hot topic right now. And so, if they don't look at it, they kind of lose the perspective. When a perspective that's going to come in to be necessary. The more we talk about cases like Facebook and Cambridge Analytica and a few others that are coming to the fore. So that's kind of the stuff that I had to think about, and that's the one thing that I would point out to a lot of those that will listen to us is that don't just kind of be guided by your direct area of study or discipline. Always try to look laterally at other disciplines and collect as much knowledge from those as possible, because that knowledge will come in very handy down the road.
Yeah, I was thinking there's another way that focused curiosity fits in, and it's that I was reading a book by an entrepreneur named Ricardo Semler, and he was talking about in his organization, they have a particular program where they allow junior employees, recent graduates, they allow them to move around from department to department and experiment with different, and just kind of broaden their interests and get more experience to see what they're most interested in. And he made the observation that most recent graduates don't have enough experience to really decide what they're going to do for the next 20 and 30 years. And you said with focused curiosity, if they become so focused on that one area, probably actually, maybe a 20% chance or greater that many of them studying fraud investigations now may not be interested in it, 4 or 5 years from now. So it really helps in more ways than one to broaden that focus during their education.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think that, like even earlier today, I was listening to a very interesting talk I just posted on my LinkedIn feed between, uh, I think, Yuval Noah Harari and Thomas Friedman, where both agree, prolific as they are in their own right, both agree that kind of this continual learning and wide spectrum learning is becoming ever so prominent. I mean, if you think back kind of to your own background, we've all had exposure either to sports or arts or both. We've all kind of read different types of books. We've interfaced with people from different walks of life. A lot of that happened both in our high school years and our maybe even middle school years and before, until we get to college. And so, yes, there's definitely a place to be focused, but I fear though that we're not spending enough time to learn kind of laterally, and so I couldn't agree more.
Thanks. And then there's one other thing that I was thinking about, and I think this is an issue with a lot of people who are in the same situation as me, who are still junior in their careers and figuring out like their long-term professional development. And that's kind of figuring out when is the right time to pursue certifications, and then when is the right time for them to go out and seek advanced degrees like like different master's programs. That's one area that people like me kind of struggle in.
Well, I would say this, that the more people I've observed, having attained some certifications myself, um, the younger you are, the hungrier you are, the more flexible you are with your time. That's when you go for the toughest certifications you could possibly attain. I mean, it's my personal opinion, but I'm also speaking from experience of being a family man. And when I have to say, okay, here are my two children, they're 8 and 14 now. Okay. And when I say, do I spend enough time with my kids and my family, just being a human, right? And the answer in most cases is no. And I don't spend enough time. And as I evaluated my personal situation, and I started looking back at some of the younger professionals, our peers that are kind of going up the ranks and looking for opportunities in our field, I noticed that being a parent, being a family man, certainly affects your chances of devoting a lot of time to certifications and devoting a lot of time to difficult tests. And as I said, CFE, for example, Certified Fraud Examiner, is certainly not an easy preparation in and of itself, and also it's not an easy exam to take. So I wish that I had more time today to be able to do it. I wish I had more opportunities, let's say about 10, 15 years ago, and more guidance 10, 15 years ago to have done it. And so for young and aspiring professionals, I always say, if you're able to ascertain which fields you're deeply connected with, not just to get a certification just because, but what is your what gives you meaning, what gives you what inspires you. The earlier you get certified in those fields, the better, because then life changes. And I think being a family man, having children, being devoted to your family is certainly an aspect that one will have to consider and grapple with when they have to evaluate, well, what's the next step in my career development, my education, and my certification. So the earlier you start, the better, I feel.
I see. Yeah, those are all really good considerations because, in all the literature and all the stuff that I consume online and in books, no one ever really talks about, well, at least in most places I'm reading, people are not really talking about their professional development in terms of, their overall life goals, such as family and stuff like that. So that's a really good consideration that I don't see many people talking about, but it plays, a bigger role than just our careers. And one more thing I was thinking about, are there any degree programs that particularly stand out to you as you and your colleagues evaluate new employees? Because I'm sure stuff like international studies or criminal justice or risk management are all, I don't know, maybe like the most popular ones. But are there any other programs that really stand out to people like you?
So I must, as I'm sure you've heard me say many times before, and you've alluded to yourself many times, and you write about. Well, actually, we both talk about it quite often. Uh, I couldn't stress a degree in psychology strongly enough. Okay. Now, I just use my own experience in this, right? Uh, it took me about 10 years to get to a point where I started asking myself, why can't I motivate people? Why can't I engage with clients and help them move forward with their kind of recommended security solutions or risk management solutions? Why is it that people fail to execute on certain things? And I must confess, there was very little discussion in professional circles about the degree to which, say, our psychological kind of system, our behavior is related directly to our ability to see certain things going in the right direction and execute on certain things or decide against them, honestly. And a lot of people will decide against rational kind of choices. And so I can't stress that at least some study in psychology strongly enough. Another thing that comes to mind, in my view, particularly because of kind of how the world works today and what we're seeing kind of in the future, is an understanding of design principles. A lot of organizations are starting to reassess what design means. And there are a lot of thought leaders, like, for example, Don Norman and Mike Monteiro, that talk about the prolific impact that design has on our everyday life. And just literally in the last hour and a half, I read a new post from McKinsey that talks about that organizations that are design oriented and where design plays a major role outperform S&P 500 by 219%. So you take Apple, you take the likes of Apple, and you just look at what they've done, being a design-oriented organization, right? It is a huge difference. And so we as professionals, again, to my earlier point, we sometimes are a bit locked in to our professional field, and we don't consider how design affects our daily routines and sometimes strategies. So those are the two things that I would certainly highlight. And needless to say, we've always talked about, degrees in political sciences, international affairs as being highly useful simply because of the recipient's ability to assess things that go far above and beyond just the borders of the United States or whatever country they come from. Having a worldly knowledge is a huge plus. Being able to understand different cultures, right? But again, that's something that I would find useful, but something that can be enhanced when a person starts in their role, depending on which company they end up with, but also what kind of mentor they have in their place of employment.
Thanks. That's a really important perspective because, at least for me, my thinking's kind of narrow. When I think about psychology, it's either I need to know about psychology to interact with people and for influence and sales and that kind of thing. It's either that or psychology is just important to do investigations and assess, the behavior of potentially violent people or subjects and POIs and that kind of thing. But yeah, that's a great way to look at it too, because for any leader in the organization, they have to be familiar with all of those just basic communication principles to win over their leadership or to win over their mentees and that kind of thing.
Well, I'll give you a direct example. Just recently, where I had an active case, and it was related to an ultra high net worth individual, um, and there was a visible disparity between how, let's say, one of the partners in marriage thought about their degree of savvy about security versus the other. Because I questioned them both at the same time, and each gave me a completely different scale of how savvy they are, which was startling even for them both as they looked at each other in slight disbelief. Uh, One of the key elements that I had to introduce to them was building tiny habits. Where do you think I got it? I didn't get it through my education in John Jay, nor did I get it through anywhere kind of through my certifications. I had to read up on kind of designs of human behavior and psychology. And when I stumbled on the work by BJ Fogg and a few others, that's what prompted me to help them kind of build routines rather than think in kind of these strategic global terms about their protection, right? I designed what I called, proudly so, an ugly sticker, right? I gave it to them. I said, you're going to hate it. But because you're going to hate it and it's going to be visible to you every day, guess how your thinking is going to change? Okay. And this ugly sticker is literally in your face, and you will have to think, even for 2 seconds each day, that Ilya left me with this unfortunate present, but here I am learning how to be more vigilant. Okay. And so it was that little trigger that I had to plant in their environment for them to start changing their frame of mind, the way they thought about their protection. And I think, had I not learned some aspects of psychology, I would have completely missed it, and I would have been just as mundane as any other person saying, "Yeah, hire more guards, lock your doors, put some cameras up, and walk away, and give them a thick report at the end of it."
Yeah, I think that's hilarious because it's such a small tool, but it's going to be so helpful to them in the long run. And yeah, just having that little bit of knowledge and being able to apply it, that just really.
I mean, these are trivialities we're talking about, but how many times have we all, as professionals, looked at those trivialities, and sometimes we say, shoot, I should have really done it a little bit differently. Maybe I should have kind of maybe steered the person in a different direction just by changing a few minute things. Or on the other hand, you'll see something. Wait a second, I just did this little thing, and because of it, my client thanked me, and because of it, I could see a positive change, right? And unfortunately, there's not a formal field of study within our profession, neither through ASIS or any other sources that I'm aware of, that helps us be proficient in these things. So I had to take a step outside of the industry and go learn these things elsewhere.
Yeah, that's really good. Just perfecting some of the nuances of what we do can just have a bigger impact. And that kind of leads to the next topic that I wanted to get to. So I wanted to float this idea out to you. So there was a recent book that came out last month called Crushing It by Gary Vaynerchuk. And he's like this internet entrepreneur. And this is actually the second edition of a previous book. And one of his big ideas is that he's basically telling his audience that all of them, no matter what they do, whether they're a lawyer or a doctor or whether they sell hot dogs or ice cream, it doesn't matter. He tells everyone that they need to be creating some kind of personal brand online by leveraging social media and just networking with others. And I wanted to get your idea about this because this is something that I've kind of applied. Because actually, when I first read his book almost 2 years ago, that was about the time that I started writing my blog because I was kind of influenced by him. So, in the way that I applied what he was talking about, just creating a blog online, creating interesting content that's helpful, going out there, engaging with people, and just being out there. For me, it was really helpful, and it just opened up a lot of opportunities. And then also, of course, there are disadvantages because, potentially that could be something that's disqualifying, or maybe like a employer looks at it in a negative way. So there's certainly advantages and disadvantages, but I just kind of wanted to get your perspective on Gary Vaynerchuk's take about everyone creating their own personal brand.
So, thank you. That's a hugely important topic and a hugely important personality that you bring up. Because Gary, while sometimes he may come across as being a bit controversial, and particularly sometimes very straight up and blunt, I think he ultimately, if you listen kind of to his overall core message, he is absolutely right. Now, if you think about just the terminology of the last 5 to 7 years, guess what's happening with our labor market, with our job market? Everybody is using this one slogan, if you will, that's called gig economy, and where freelancers and just individuals in general, the act of selling your brain and selling your smarts to someone else is becoming ever more highlighted, even if you're working in-house, even if you're working for an organization. So what Gary seems to be saying, at least the way I understand, is don't lose a chance of creating your own kind of impact on the environment that you're in, and also branding it as yours, leaving a mark that has your name on it. Okay? Why is that important? Because at the end of the day, we need to stop thinking that when we go and work in-house, that we're more than a rented brain. We still are. Yeah, each one of us is literally a rented brain. You either perform well, you sometimes perform so-so, and sometimes you don't perform well for a variety of reasons. But you are providing input that's generated through your ideas, that's generated through your understanding and your knowledge. So it is only, therefore, rational and logical, I feel, to build something that identifies you as a carrier of that knowledge. And so that's why I applaud the efforts that you, Travis, you yourself have been kind of applying and building your own platform, creating that outreach that has your name on it. I'm trying to do the same, just for reasons that it's no longer viable to just be a kind of part of the gray matter of the organization where everybody is considered, as I heard somebody else use a term, sheeple. Okay, we're not. We bring color to any organization, no matter what it is that we do, good or bad. Okay, and so if you create something of your own that distinguishes you as a thinker, as a carrier of useful ideas, as a person who can contribute to an organization, it's only sensible to create something that speaks, that carries your ideas forward. Now, it could be a personal website or a blog, whichever, like Brian Krebs, for example. He writes a lot, everybody reads him. Bruce Schneier, same thing. He's created a brand for himself, and he writes very interesting pieces, both on his website, his blog, and also he provides a narrative to various other organizations, like an article earlier today to CNN. And so those people have established themselves on their own. Whether or not they go to work for other organizations doesn't matter. It could be a collateral effect, or it could be one project that they decide to work on. However, having that association with you as the author, as you as the thought leader, I think is ever so important. And the younger you are in the profession, as long as you feel that you have the skill set necessary, and if the mentors that you have kind of guide you to it, I think the sooner you do it, the sooner you start branding yourself, the better.
Yeah, and then I also think, in terms of a wider view, just individuals doing their own branding and creating content and reaching out to other professionals, it's really not selfish and only helping them. It also helps their organizations in many ways. First, the individual themselves is learning more by going out and speaking with other individuals. For example, one of my recent collaborations, I worked with a gentleman from Florida, and he helped me produce almost a 10-page PDF about drone threats and countermeasures for people in protective security. And there's almost no circumstances where I would just run into someone like that on the street if I didn't have some kind of online outlet to connect with people like that. So really it just helps individual professionals become more developed and have more human capital so that they could contribute to their organizations too. It's not just individual professional development.
And I could add to that, and thank you for raising those particular points. I could add to that uh, I think people even now underestimate the value of LinkedIn. I mean, I can't sing more praises to this platform for reasons that, even if we all understand that the feed that you receive each day is a bit curated based on your kind of past clicks and past interests, nonetheless, the spectrum of information you can learn and how other thinkers introduce both articles, publications, and video content from other sources, right? It saves you a tremendous amount of time going and seeking that information on your own. Okay. It also opens up as an outlet for those, and sometimes myself included, who feel that some ideas that they have been talking about are slightly stifled, if you will. Like yesterday, I was listening to a video, prolific, very interesting stuff from a gentleman who is in the risk management profession. He's a proper risk manager, talking about how the field is going in the wrong direction and giving very poignant reasons of why that is. Okay, I wouldn't have found it anywhere else because he chose LinkedIn as a platform, and I think it's the easiest outlet for someone in a professional capacity to exchange, to share that idea and exchange it with others. And I found great value in just listening, observing how other people think, engaging with them as much as you like, or as much as you think is necessary, and also sharing your perspective, offering some ideas that you might think kind of give voice and an outlet to your core message. So I think that platforms like LinkedIn and others are quite useful. I also see that a lot of discussions are happening on platforms like Medium. Some people don't like to write a lot, so they stick to Twitter. And I find that just interaction on social media is quite useful. In many cases, it's high quality. And as long as you are able to curate it, as long as you are able to kind of navigate through some of the noise on those platforms, I think you can find extremely valuable content.
Yeah, you're right. That's one big part, is just being exposed to the amount of content, and such targeted content about risk management and investigations and that type of thing. And then I think one other area that I think people don't necessarily take advantage of right now, but it also gives people the opportunity to reach out to basically any experienced person within their field. They could just directly message the CEO of the company and ask them, their take on a particular issue, or to seek advice or any kind of career information.
Agreed. I've done it on a number of occasions, particularly asking other practitioners whom I respect to offer some ideas about the industry, both in private and also publicly, as we exchanged on the in that forum. And I feel that it goes above and beyond of all the events that are organized, because you can only make your time make time available for so many events that you have to show up in person for, or even attend webinars. You can only make so much time, but in these smaller bits of exchange, I think sometimes people are always, not always, but in most cases, they're careful to offer the most direct ideas, the most direct feedback. And I think because of the limitation of each other's time and respect for each other's time, people try not to waste each other's time. And this kind of, so again, I find it very, very useful.
There's definitely a lot to be gained from LinkedIn and other social networks like Medium and all those too. And that leads to another thing to talk about, which was viable certifications in our industry. And I'll talk a little bit about my recent experience earning my CPP. So I kind of took like a very pragmatic approach to it. I just read, a handful of columns on LinkedIn about, advice for studying for the CPP and reasons to get it versus getting other certifications and that kind of thing. And I basically took all the material and just read about 100 pages per day for like a month and a half, and then took the exam. And in the grand scheme, I really didn't learn that much. I still would not say that I'm competent in things like physical security or information security or any of that stuff. It certainly opened my eyes up to a lot of different aspects, especially physical security standards and design and tools and that kind of thing. So it opened up my eyes to a lot of things, but I really feel like I didn't learn as much as I thought I would. And I definitely cannot say that I'm competent in all of the domains in their certification process.
Okay, so that's typically the case with a lot of these certifications. And by the way, congratulations on getting your CPP. Regardless of kind of the volume of knowledge that you were able to receive, you're better off because you studied and you still aggregated some knowledge in the end. So, and CPP continues to be one of the kind of calling cards, if you will, for the vast majority of security professionals and also talent recruiters in our market. So it certainly is of value. Now, you raise a very important point, and as I said, for a lot of certification, that's the case. And the more people I talk to, that's kind of, and the more talent I used to direct to go and get certified, that's the feedback I get, is that there is a very concerted effort that you apply in a short period of time to get ready for the test. There is also a very concerted effort and huge mental strain to take the test. After that, people forget to take a step back and say and ask themselves, just like you did, how much of that information did I actually retain? So if I were to retest you a month from now, a month from you having to pass the exam, right? Would you pass it again without having to touch the books? Okay, so well, thanks for saying that, and I'm sure that the replies will be different, person to person. Some people retain more, and some don't.
Right, but I think another aspect of that is studying to the test, and what's on their test is not necessarily what asset protection professionals are doing on a daily basis.
And herein lies another issue, and I'm not saying it's that it's so detrimental, but I think it's something that many practitioners miss, is when, I guess the question is, to what degree do you front this certification to everyone, including recruiters, as a sign that you're all knowledgeable about asset protection? Whereas if we simply apply, again, a little bit of psychology and how human brain works, it's not so much that focused certification that gets you to be all knowledgeable, but it is the continual learning that actually gets you to be knowledgeable. And so my challenge to a lot of young professionals is not to stop, to never switch off their brain, to always, and again, that's why, these questions about branding yourself and social media interaction are so interconnected with the fact that you get certified, or you aspire to get certified. Is once you get your certification, don't ever think, or at least I hope you will never think, that, oh, okay, I'm done. I got my certs. I'm now great talent. I can get hired and just get a great job, great salary, and then go to a couple of breakfasts and dinners every once in a while and drinks with friends in the industry and talk war stories. Okay, every bit of information that I found as I continue to kind of dig for different sources of info and different opinions, different ideas, has opened my eyes to something new, and sometimes created a challenge for my previous beliefs. Okay, for example, I don't believe in monumental, huge strategies and security. I don't believe in that. I believe in smaller changes. I also don't believe in the same in change management. I don't believe in grand designs for change management. I believe in small but concerted steps toward an objective. Okay, and how to change, but change incrementally rather than in one shot. Okay, and so all of that came through continual search for ideas and information. That's the challenge I offer to our peers in the industry, is to constantly kind of push yourself to seek that new knowledge, because just take a step back and ask yourself, okay, I got my certs. If I retake that test in a month, if I retake it in 6 months, if I retake it in a year, in 5, in 10, will I pass? Okay, so I'll leave you with that thought.
Yeah, and that's also a really good way to look at it too. Just the certification, of course, it doesn't mean that anyone knows everything, but you pointed out that it's a good way to at least measure that the person is continuously learning and at least testing themselves in different areas and trying to challenge themselves.
By the way, I'm a dog person, love dogs, kudos to dogs. Totally love it. I wish I had one, but because of our recent relocation, I don't, but love dogs.
For all of our listeners, if you could hear a dog barking in the background, please forgive me. That's our female Rottweiler named Karma. And if you are so inclined, you could probably find 1 or 2 pictures of her on the EP Nexus Instagram. So Ilya, one thing we talked about too was engagement outside of academia. And what were some of the points that you wanted to touch on?
Thanks for bringing that up. So that's an important topic, I think. And we kind of talked about it a little bit before in previous bits, but I think with such volume of very useful content and very useful kind of collaboration and interaction that happens both in social media and also in some events that take place throughout the country and the world, right? It's just a matter of kind of developing the right system of tracking that information and not being overloaded by the noise and the volume of info that's available. And also the same system helps kind of develop the right relationships with professionals and potentially, those that seek talent. And I think the way I thought about it was, again, about expansion of the knowledge spectrum and not just sticking with kind of what we do day in, day out in protection of assets. And things that came to my mind, which I kind of would like to list, and by no means is it a is it a full list, but just some things that stuck out to me from which I learn um, are kind of as follows. So I learn a lot of information from places like South by Southwest. It tells me about trends in the industry that are applicable to my industry, but also that are applicable to the industry of technology and just thought leadership that exists out there. Kind of what are the global trends that people are picking up on, and what's happening in terms of kind of technology in general and its proliferation in our lives. Another thing that I pay close attention to is the World Economic Forum. They published recently their new global risk assessment report, which I advise everyone to read. It's a very interesting document. Now, I suggest that if you read that, or if you read a lot of their publications, don't just think in terms of kind of the doom and gloom that sometimes those documents and publications provide, but also think in terms of opportunities and optimism that exists about what can be solved in the world and the problems that exist that can be addressed. I always enjoy discussions among futurists like Ray Kurzweil and people in that arena who are kind of thinking 10, 15, 20, 100 years ahead. What technologies today and what trends today help facilitate our well-being, our happiness in the future. That's something that I find quite useful, because then it helps me understand and then bring that in context of those clients I work with and the organizations that I work with. Then I look at economics, psychology, history, sociology, design, and politics. So those are some of the areas where it's not just enough to say, okay, I picked the topic. This is my set of themes, and I'm going to follow them. What's important is to identify who the thought leaders are in each one of those themes. Like, who are the people at the forefront? Recently, I was at an event that was devoted to cryptocurrencies, for example, and blockchain. And the presenter offered a very interesting perspective on what's happening and the scale and the speed of how blockchain is growing and how it's being deployed, and what it means for cryptocurrencies and what's happening with the proliferation of cryptocurrencies. And one topic that was very interesting was lack of regulation. But it wasn't enough for me, because a lot has been said about it. So I came up to the speaker afterwards and I said, I'm less concerned about kind of the scale, speed, and regulation, because that's something achievable, at least, people can comprehend it. But what's happening with application of ethics in all of those systems that are being introduced? Talk about blockchain and talk about just the cryptocurrencies themselves. Who is the thought leader on the side of ethics? And he was puzzled. He couldn't answer my question. And so I try to identify somebody who is really driving thought leadership that is very unique and really touches on the fundamentals of the subject matter. And I think that's the part that I find extremely useful. There's only maybe less than 5 people who really epitomize that thought leader kind of title, if you will. And I think that once you're able to identify that group, that small group of people who talk about each one of the topics and who are highly prolific, that saves, first of all, a lot of time in educating yourself. And secondly, it also helps kind of drive your thinking. You're not going to agree with everything these people say, or sometimes they will conflict with one another, but at least it sets up kind of your direction for each one of those topics, and you learn a great deal. So I would say staying engaged outside academia today, as we talked about before, is very easy. There's a lot of content. Just filter through the noise, pick your themes, make sure that they're not all closely related or part of your professional discipline, and spread your wings and just identify the thought leaders that are out there. Make sure that there's more than one, of course, and then just engage with content and also help others find it. If you're found it, make sure that you're helpful to someone else, because that's how we build relationships.
Yeah, that last point is really good because I think I kind of see this a lot. Well, I guess it depends the organizations that you're around, but sometimes people feel a need that they should like hoard a particular source or not give people or kind of like deny or omit access to a particular free source where they could go and learn more information just for like their own personal gain. So that's definitely a really good point. And as far as like as far as trends towards considering the ideas of like futurists and technologists, I even see more of that in like the mainstream standardized organizations. For example, I missed the lecture, but I was talking with people that attended the lectures at ACES in Dallas earlier this year, and they said one of the most exciting speakers was he was a futurist, and he was basically talking about how he sees the future of security and technology in our lives and all of that sort of thing.
So I can pick up on that, and I'll tell you, kudos to ASIS for having thought of someone like that and having brought somebody to the stage like this. I think, uh, if nothing else, think about memory and think about information retention. Whenever the some content is new and you haven't heard it before, it automatically gets retained, in a better way. Let's put it that way. So I would say, if a person is bringing something to you that is really unique, that's something that you haven't thought about before. I'm sure if you haven't taken notes, but at least it'll stick in your memory, and you'll try to do a little bit more research on that. And it may also challenge some of your current positions, right? So kudos to ASAS for having done that. This is something that I've been talking about for years, trying to articulate as politely as I could that it's not enough to only talk about content that's about 5 to 10 years old and that many others have talked about both in their forum and elsewhere. I think it's time now to actually bring forward people who don't think like most of us, who have a completely different mindset, and that they can at least challenge our beliefs and also elaborate on some of the subject matters that we're just not familiar with. And I think if more events are structured that way, I think it is going to be a challenge to actually, to make sure that you have enough seats in the room.
Yeah, that's a great point. And that leads to the next topic that I wanted to talk about, which was just how we could maintain our knowledge. And one of the big things that I see that, is not, I don't know, I would say it's probably less orthodox, but that's just creating some kind of original research or creating content either in a way that you're promoting it on LinkedIn or your personal website, or in other ways. I was reading one article by a security professional, and in their organization, they have what they call like a rush hour MBA, which is basically like an in-house program where professionals will teach courses at the end of the day at 5 o'clock when people would otherwise be in traffic. They could instead lecture and participate in lectures and seminars at their own work where they discuss, everything from certification to any technical topic. So I think creating original research and just teaching whatever it is that you might be studying at that particular time or teaching a subject that you're competent in, I think that could be a great advantage as far as maintaining our knowledge goes.
Totally agree. That's a very good point. Actually, I've heard about kind of both programs that are available in places of employment during work hours. I also have heard of either formal or informal clubs, if you will, that kind of start up their teaching sessions after the work hours or kind of shortly before the day ends. And that's kind of very valued by employees. Unfortunately, not many organizations do it. And a lot of organizations either don't do it at all, or they support these very stale kind of webinar-based learning methods that happen very infrequently. And obviously, the retention of information is nearly zero. What I think about, just like you said, is the collaborative nature, the team-based nature of learning and storytelling um, remains in people's minds longer, and it produces more quality information and knowledge than just receiving a lecture. Okay. I also think in terms of really be kind of an individual mindset about how you learn, because it's very difficult for organizations to apply brushstrokes, very broad brushstrokes on everyone in their organizations or on even subgroups to offer meaningful content. Okay, unless you as an individual take it upon yourself and say, okay, what are the ways in which I best consume information and new knowledge, and what are the ways in which I best retain it? And so if you're able to connect with the organization, at least in smaller groups through your management, to articulate how that works for you, that's probably one of the most meaningful ways in which an organization can then support you. And I've heard this argument made many, many times, and I keep on trying to be polite about it when I advise people who engage with me. A lot of people say, well, I don't get enough education in my organization. And I think I said it to you before. It's not an excuse anymore. Yeah, maybe about 10, 15 years ago, when there wasn't enough content on the internet and there wasn't enough access to content, you could make that argument. But that doesn't work anymore. There is ample resources outside of an organization, either through individual humans or through online resources, social media, what have you. Various organizations that supply that information and post it everywhere, and that organize events, and also smaller professional groups that get together just informally for just a session of storytelling. I think if you're able to just connect with one of the methods or few of the methods in which that information is exchanged and knowledge is shared, that's going to make such a huge impact on your professional credentials, your professional acumen. And most importantly, it's going to set you up as a person who's able to pass it forward to the next generation. Because if you don't, and you haven't done so already, being a seasoned professional, shame on you.
Yeah, and that last point's especially important because just the act of us teaching something that we're competent in, that almost, well, one, it makes us understand what we're teaching more, but then two, it really makes us challenge how competent we are in that area, because anyone that's really truly competent in a particular area, they could easily break down complex ideas into just a simple way to understand.
Sure, and what also works is you can reduce a complex issue to a scenario, and a professional who's been around can always create or offer a scenario from their personal experience, which speaks to this complex issue, and therefore it creates a story. And stories are much better remembered than just, as I said, just as a formal lecture. And so, or dry delivery of content, unfortunately, as many universities still provide. Okay, and so I think that's much more meaningful.
Yeah, those are all great points. Was there anything else that you want to add for maintaining knowledge? Because other than that, I did have one last question that kind of related.
Yeah, let me. I want to also just kind of break it out into a few like specific subsets of where content is, and perhaps to incentivize some people to just kind of think for themselves of how to search for content where. Okay, so I think and I made a list of this just to hopefully that it's useful for those who listen to this interview uh, or this dialogue, I must say. Um, I would say that some of the ways in which we consume content um, could be broken out into very few but very understandable categories. We can listen through audio. Um, we can both listen and observe through video. Um, we could have a multimedia content that is presented to us in a variety of text, video, and audio signal. We could read digital print. We could attend live and recorded events. And of course, last but not least, is physical printed material. Now, what I just listed is just a subset of those ways in which humans would consume information. And so I only suggest that each individual who listens simply just looks at these and says, well, what's the best way for me? How do I operate? Like, for example, I prefer both audio and visual content. So that's why I try to, when there's a book available, I try to get it on audio so I could listen to it in the car or just through headphones through my device. Others prefer just reading a book and in hardcover and just kind of flipping pages. Some people prefer to learn through small groups where it's an exchange of information, which is it actually works for me quite well too. I would say it's just really taking the time to select what works for me, and then really concentrating on consuming information and knowledge through those channels rather than trying to cover everything. Okay, I've seen too many events where people come just for drinks and food, and they learn nothing, and they still get continuing professional education points. So I think that needs to stop. I think that we owe it to ourselves and also to those certifications we hold to learn in a better way, in a way that's more individual for us. But only we can decide. Organizations would have a much tougher time to decide on our behalf. So that's the last point I wanted to make.
That's a really important point because we all need to structure our own development in the way that best suits us. Like for me, for example, right now I'm trying to read this whole book, Open Source Intelligence Techniques by Michael Bazzell, and just sitting down, reading the book, and playing with 100 different tools online, I get more out of that than I can out of any lecture that I watch online or really any course. I've been to a handful of open source intelligence courses, and really none of them pass on as much knowledge as just sitting down and playing with all these different tools and just putting in the work and experimenting.
Sure, completely agree.
And there was one other thing I wanted to talk about. I was discussing this with someone the other day, and it also relates to young professionals. And that was, how do people, or like, how do hiring managers or senior security professionals in the organization, how do they go about finding people that are passionate about what they're doing and just selecting the right people? I just wanted to kind of get some thoughts from you about that.
I must tell you a few things that I look for in talent. One is the drive. I want the young professional to appear to be hungry for knowledge and to be open-minded about about what they're stepping into and how to seek that knowledge everywhere they get exposure. I want talent to be eloquent, to use language as it's designed, that tries to at least, a person that tries at least to limit the number of mistakes they make in their spoken language and written language as much as possible, and to be able to communicate their ideas clearly. Okay. Unfortunately, not many people can do that. Okay. And colleges sometimes don't prepare individuals specifically for that. I want a person who has very good critical thinking skills, who doesn't take what's presented to them at face value, who always will read things twice to understand the underlying issues, and then will argue for and against certain presented content or ideas. And I think that in combination, if you look at the skills I mentioned, if one were to master something like that, not to master is probably a strong word, but to demonstrate some skills in this, I think that would be very important. Last but not least, however, is worldly knowledge. Okay, we all know that in the States, most of the people are not very good with geography. Okay, you ask people, you point to a country somewhere in Europe, and they certainly don't know what country that is just by the shape of it. Can't name it, or don't know mountain ridges in various other parts of the world. And it's very visible when someone like John Oliver makes fun of it all the time on TV. Okay, that is something that I think is closely related to the need for worldly knowledge. You need to understand what other cultures do, how they've come about, some aspects of their history, what are some societal trends, what are some political trends, and without that knowledge, because the world is global, we have organizations that operate in so many countries, and that require this very vast knowledge, right? I think without that at your disposal, even if you're a critical thinker, even if you're hungry for knowledge, if you come with just a closed mindset about a certain geography and a certain set of values and norms, I think you're going to be at a disadvantage.
Thank you. Those are all some great points for me to think about, especially as far as, examining how hungry a person is and their motivations and critical thinking, and then thinking in terms of, like you said, the entire world, and having, a larger perspective about things. Thanks.
My pleasure.
That's really all I have. Is there anything else that you wanted to share about projects that you're working on, like Sphere State or anything else?
No, I'm just proud to say that Sphere State is moving forward. I think that there's quite a bit of interest in the concept, and I've been assisting some folks and working with some folks that see value in what Sphere State has to offer. And I think for me, it's just it makes me feel very proud that I'm able to share some knowledge and empower and enable some people to get ahead in their careers. My engagement at Integrated continues to in the shape that I'm helping the team internally. I'm also I'm serving in the client-facing role as before. Like I said, I feel that I'm able to apply my skills in a way that helps me feel validated and helps me feel proud.
Awesome. I'm happy to hear that Sphere State's growing too. And I'll be sure to leave links in the article for your LinkedIn page and the Sphere State pages on social media, and the main page as well.
Super. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ilya. It was a pleasure having you, and I know our readers will be able to get a ton of great info out of this. Thank you very much.
Oh, my pleasure. No problem. Thanks again for the opportunity. Look forward to the next one.